Hello everyone, my name's John Rennie Short. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where we are today. And I'm speaking with a colleague and good friend, Stephen Braude, professor of philosophy. He's also chair of the department. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We're going to speak about Steve's new book, The Gold Leaf Lady. But first of all, I'd like to find out more about you, Steve.
Well, it's a sordid and complicated tale. I started innocently enough. Academically, I was doing work in philosophy at the intersection of philosophical logic, the philosophy of time, and the philosophy of language. And I was busy writing a dissertation on temporal logic. And in those days, I fancied myself to be a kind of hard-nosed materialist. Not for any particularly good reason. It was just a kind of intellectual conceit I was cultivating in those days. And it was a slow day in Northampton, Massachusetts, and some friends came over. We'd seen the only movie in town, and they said, well, let's play this game called Table Up. What they meant was, let's have a seance. And I knew nothing about psychical research, and frankly, neither did my friends, but they said they'd played this game a few times, and when it worked, it was great fun. So to my great surprise and horror, actually, for the next 3 hours, I watched my table rise in the air and spell out answers in response to the questions. Now, I'm sure people listening to this, many of them anyway, must be saying to themselves, yeah, right. And frankly, there's no way I can describe this that will quell all of their skeptical concerns. But I will say that it was broad daylight, it was my house, it was my table. My friends were not practical jokers. I'm not even sure they had a sense of humor.
They were philosophers, after all.
Yes, they were, that's right. I probably should mention we weren't stoned. And in fact, if one of my friends got up to leave the room, the table continued to rise under our fingers. We could be standing next to the table, and the table would rise under our fingers. We clearly were not lifting it with our legs. It made a great impression on me, as you can imagine, but I felt I couldn't really discuss this with my mentors. And I was focused on getting my PhD and getting a job. So I literally put the event out of mind until I finished my PhD, I got a job and got tenure. And then with the alleged comfort afforded by academic freedom, I decided I really needed to come to grips with this thing that had happened back in grad school. And I knew that some well-known philosophers had looked carefully at the data of psychical research, and so I read what they had to say. And I decided, after all, there was something here worth sinking my teeth into. And then I decided if I was going to do a responsible job of that, I needed to become a member of the community of scientists and scholars looking carefully at the evidence.
Was this a difficult thing to do, in the sense, given the hard-nosed nature of much of your previous philosophical research?
It certainly went against the grain, but I felt it would have been dishonest intellectually to do otherwise. So I'm now about as much of an insider as it's possible to be in that community. I'm past president of the Parapsychological Association, which is an affiliate organization of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I'm currently editor-in-chief of the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And I've written a bunch of books. And when I started all of this, when I started down this path after doing more or less mainstream work in philosophy of language and philosophy of logic, I first tackled the experimental evidence in parapsychology and wrote a book about that and the philosophical implications of all of that. And I still had a pretty disdainful view of the non-experimental evidence. I assumed that if there was good, sustainable evidence for psychical phenomena, that it would have to come from the lab. I didn't realize at the time that most of the people who had perpetuated the view that the non-experimental evidence was not worthwhile really didn't know what that evidence was, and I had, like they probably, had just accepted it uncritically. So I was surprised and, again, horrified to discover that this evidence was much better than people made it out to be. And so I wrote another book on the non-experimental evidence, mostly having to do with large-scale psychokinesis. The book was called The Limits of Influence.
So the Gold Leaf Lady book is a continuation of a large body of work conducted over a long number of years.
Yes, it was a long and winding path. I mean, I wrote 2 other books before that, one about multiple personality, which turned out to be relevant to all of this. I wrote it because I was interested in material in the philosophy of mind and the unity of consciousness. But I also knew that at some point in my life, when I became more chronologically challenged, I would want to write a book on the evidence for survival of bodily death. And I also knew that the evidence from dissociation and multiple personality looked a lot like what we see in cases of mediumship or channeling. And so I knew that if I was ever going to write a book on the evidence for life after death, I needed to know something about the history of psychiatry and dissociation and hypnosis. And so that led to a book called First Person Plural. And then finally I wrote a book on life after death called Immortal Remains. But by that time, I was old enough to collect Social Security, and I figured, well, it's time for a memoir. And The Gold Leaf Lady is really that. It's about some of my more interesting personal case investigations.
Let's begin with the title, The Gold Leaf Lady. Who is the Gold Leaf Lady?
The Gold Leaf Lady is a woman in Florida, now in her mid to late 50s. She's a functionally illiterate woman who works as basically a domestic. And she seems to be a good all-round psychic. She works with the police on solving of crimes. She seems to be a medium or a channel. Some people say she's a healer, though she wasn't able to do anything about what she calls my landing strip. And spontaneously and apparently out of her control, her body breaks out in what looks like gold leaf. I could be sitting this close to her and suddenly something would appear on her face or on her hands.
So you've actually been there when what looked like gold leaf broke out?
Yes, I've seen it quite a few times, and in fact there's quite a lot of first-hand testimony from others who've also seen it. I mean, for example, people holding her hand at one point and then suddenly her arm will break out in large quantities of this material. Now, I've investigated her on a number of occasions. I've been to see her with magicians. Magicians have confirmed that the material, which we can just scrape off her and handle and examine, it's very difficult to manipulate.
So you're using magicians as a test case for subterfuge or...
Sure, it's always a live question whether this woman whose name is Katie is really just a skilled conjurer of some kind. And the magicians I've worked with have all concluded that the material is much too difficult to work with. And besides, the stuff appears right in front of people's eyes after her body has been carefully examined. It's not as if she has some nearby stash of foil that she can dip into. Now, the foil, it turns out, is not gold, unfortunately. It turns out to be brass. I've had it analyzed here at UMBC. I've had it analyzed at Johns Hopkins Material Science Department, University of Denver, a number of other places. It seems to be, in all other respects, perfectly normal rolled brass leaf. That's often called Dutch metal or composition leaf.
And it's breaking out from her skin.
Breaks out from her skin.
Wow.
Yes. It looks like it's...
I'm lost for words in the sense.
I understand. It looks like some people describe it as she's sweating it or exuding it, but I think that's actually not what's going on. I mean, part of what's intriguing about the case is that it's not clear exactly how to classify the phenomenon. I mean, there's a fairly complex taxonomy of psychical phenomena, and the two most obvious candidates would be, first, materialization, where objects apparently appear out of nothing. The problem is, for all the evidence there is of ostensible materializations, materialized phenomena usually dematerialize. They don't hang around for very long.
So they disappear.
Katie's foil stays there. I have large quantities of it. And the other option would be something that's called an apport, where in many poltergeist cases, for example, objects will disappear from one location and appear somewhere else. Now, if that's what's going on, it's not clear whose body of composition leaf is being rated for all the stuff to appear on Katie.
It seems a fascinating case, but you have others as well. Would you like to discuss any of the other case studies in your book?
I will mention one. I came in at the end of a career of a person named Ted Sirios, who produced what's known as thoughtographs. He could apparently impress images by thinking about it on Polaroid, instant Polaroid film. He was investigated very carefully in the 1960s by psychiatrist Jewel Eisenbud. And I'm pleased to say that the UMBC Library, Special Collections, has the entire body of Sirios's work with Eisenbud and the entire Eisenbud material on parapsychology. So it's there for people to investigate.
Fascinating. Any other case studies you'd like to discuss?
Well, so the others in the Gold Leaf Lady are a little more difficult to discuss. they're often cautionary tales. Some of them were unsuccessful attempts to observe psychic phenomena with various subjects. One, because I think he was a fraud, and I believe I caught him cheating. Another, because I think he was psychologically trampled on by one of his investigators. So I think that's a cautionary tale about the delicacy of the psychological conditions necessary for eliciting good phenomena with the subject.
I've read the book. I enjoyed it tremendously. One of the things that struck me about it was the very careful path you tread between skepticism, looking to see if things were above board, but also a sort of healthy regard for open-eyed truth. I mean, often you speak at various places, or write various places about almost the ideology of scientific rationalists who will not look at data and truth when it's there if it doesn't meet their paradigm.
I've found at least two major kinds of closed-mindedness since I started investigating parapsychological data. There are lovers of the miraculous who accept everything uncritically, and there are those who reject everything uncritically. And it seems to me the world is generally a lot stranger than most people appreciate. And if we've learned anything from the history of science, it's that humankind is not a very good judge of the empirically possible. The world usually turns out to be more interesting than each generation thinks it is.
Always the strangeness of the word. I mean, if you go to theoretical physics, if you read anything in theoretical physics, it presents a world of multi-dimensions, of numerous particles that can never be seen. It's a strange, exotic world, and it's subatomic reality. So it seems that a lot of the work that you're doing is taking that open-eyed truth look at what's happening in our everyday lives.
I hope that's right. I mean, I've met some closed-minded physicists about this, but on the whole, I would say that physicists who deal with a level of strangeness that we don't find in other sciences are, on the whole, more open to paranormal research than, say, members of the social sciences, who are often already defensive about the scientific status of their disciplines.
Now, are you still hunting ghosts, still looking for parapsychological phenomenon?
When cases come my way, I usually turn down opportunities to investigate hauntings because most of the time you sit around and wait for something to happen and then nothing happens. Often enough, if you want a phenomenon to go away, bring in a parapsychologist. That's almost guaranteed to kill it. And it might come as no surprise that the philosophy department doesn't have provisions in its budget for paranormal case investigations. So I have to use my time wisely. Either I have to ride on media's coattails, which I've done sometimes, or I have to fund it myself, or I have to wait for funding. But yes, I'm hoping to get some funding to investigate some so-called sitter groups in Europe at the moment where they're getting table levitations and apparent materializations.
All right. Now, if we want to find out more about your work, do you have a website?
I do. Actually, I have a university website, and the web address is so complicated that unless you're a URL savant, you'll never remember it. So I have also a whimsical website, jazzphilosopher.com, and you'll find links on jazzphilosopher.com to my UMBC website, and you can get information on my books and articles and download some of them.
Now, often people are continuing on work or taking new paths in their work. Where do you stand immediately after the Gold Leaf Ladies being published?
Well, I've taken on editorship of the Journal of Scientific Exploration, which is, I'm discovering a challenge that I hadn't anticipated.
Is that available on online? Or?
Past issues are available online for downloading. Otherwise, you have to join the Society for Scientific Exploration, and can attend annual conferences and get hard copies of the journal. And as I said, I'm hoping to continue to investigate weird phenomena wherever they crop up.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for an informative and enlightening look at the paranormal and parapsychology in a really good book, The Gold Leaf Ladies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.